Electoral Referendum Bill, first reading.
Speaker.
The Honourable Simon Power.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the that the Electoral Referendum Bill be now read a first time. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be referred for consideration to the Electoral Legislation Committee. Mr. Speaker, this bill will fulfil the government's pre-election commitment to hold a binding referendum on MMP. In 1993, New Zealand voted to change to the mixed member proportional representation, or MMP, voting system. For most of the previous 140 years, as members are aware, elections were held under the first-past-the-post system. Since then, 5 elections have been held under MMP, making it timely to consider how the voting system is working and whether New Zealanders wish to retain MMP. Many New Zealanders understood that they would have the opportunity to revisit their decision through a later referendum. This bill provides New Zealanders with that opportunity. After weighing the options, the government decided to take a two-stage approach to the referendum, similar to the process followed in 1992 and 1993. As far as practicable, the government has been keen to replicate the process adopted in 1992 and 1993 to give New Zealanders a genuine opportunity to have another say on the electoral system. The first referendum will be held in conjunction with the 2011 general election, which requires legislation to be passed through the House. The bill provides that the referendum questions will first ask voters whether they wish to retain the present MMP voting system. Regardless of their answer to the first question, voters will then be asked what alternative voting system they would prefer from a list of alternatives: first past the post, preferential vote, single transferable vote and supplementary member. The bill includes a brief description of each of these alternative voting systems, but essentially the menu of options is the same as that put to voters in the 1992 referendum. There are 2 aspects that will remain consistent across the electoral system options. First, each system is to be considered on the basis it will be used to elect a House of 120 seats. Second, each system will retain the current provisions for the Māori seats. The alternative voting system should be considered on their fundamental features and not other elements of the electoral system. In addition, the Confidence and Supply Agreement with the Māori Party states that this referendum will not include a question about the Māori seats. The bill also includes the form of the voting paper with the questions to be put to voters. The Chief Electoral Officer will determine the order of the voting systems on the voting paper by lot to avoid any perception of bias in the order in which the voting systems are listed. When we first announced the two-stage process for the referenda, the feedback we received, including from the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, was that we needed to incorporate an option for those who wanted to see modifications to MMP rather than an entirely new electoral system or the status quo. However, it would be difficult in the time available for the government to put up a modified version in the 2011 referendum that meets those expectations without being seen to skew the result. As it was in 1992 and 1993, this referendum process is about allowing the public to make fundamental choices between different types of system. Having said this, the bill does provide that if 50% or more vote to retain MMP in the first referendum, then the Electoral Commission will undertake a review of aspects of the way in which MMP works. If a majority votes for a change from MMP, this government is committed to holding a second binding referendum in conjunction with the 2014 general election, which will be a runoff between MMP and the most preferred alternative voting system from the first referendum. If voters prefer the alternative voting system, the 2017 general election will be held under this new system. I acknowledge that this is a lengthy process, but the future of our voting system should not be rushed. Cabinet were faced with a range of options that would have truncated the timing, including use of standalone and postal referenda. But by holding each referendum in conjunction with a general election, we could maximise voter turnout on such an important constitutional matter. The process allows for a full 6 months consideration at Select Committee, as well as ample time for a public information campaign prior to the referendum to be undertaken by the Electoral Commission. The bill also regulates advertising in respect of the 2011 referendum. Anyone advertising for or against any of the referendum options will need to include their name and address with the advertisement. If an advertiser spends over $12,000 during the regulated period, they will need to register with the Electoral Commission, who will publish a list of advertisers. An advertiser will not be required to provide returns of their expenses or funding sources to the Electoral Commission, nor will they be subject to spending limits. These rules are intended to provide transparency without restricting the advertiser's freedom of expression and are consistent with the regulation of parallel campaigning in the upcoming electoral finance reform legislation. I would note that this goes further than the rules surrounding advertising for government referenda in 1992, 1993 and 1997, and that no government referendum in the post-war period has limited spending by third-party campaigners. Members will be aware that these same issues arise in the context of the government's proposed reform to electoral finance rules. It's my intention to refer the upcoming electoral finance legislation to the Electoral Legislation Committee also, so that the committee's consideration of these issues, in particular the regulation of parliamentary spending, can be consistent. Finally, I would like to add that I am pleased to have had the opportunity to meet on a number of occasions with all parties in the House to discuss the government's proposals, and I value their willing and constructive approach on these issues. That cooperation has been in keeping with the constitutional significance of this legislation, which, Mr. Speaker, should not be underestimated. In New Zealand, the triennial election of representatives to this House is arguably the most significant constitutional check on executive power. The decision as to how those votes are translated into seats is rightly one for the people of New Zealand to make. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Honourable Leanne Dalsey.